All right. Okay, that's us. Janet,
Hi.
thank you for being here. How are you doing?
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm good, thanks. And you?
Yeah, I'm okay. Thank you. Not too bad. Yeah, just we're at opposite ends of the day. You're just easing into your day and I'm easing out of mine. So
Yeah, different perspective.
different perspective, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. You've still got to maintain some energy, so we'll try to keep that in mind. That you're going to
Sounds
need to get through
good.
the rest of the day.
This is true.
So I really appreciate being here. Janet Ridsdale, for those of you who haven't encountered Janet, has an organization called JR Strategic Consulting in Calgary in Canada. And we've been chatting just recently about the topic of resilience, because it's a big word in education that just keeps getting bigger. Lots of people are talking about it, keeps coming back again and again. And of course, the wider context of well-being, and you mentioned recently, Janet, that you see things through a well-being lens. So it's that commingling of this aspect with education, which is obviously a hot topic right now with the last few years that everybody's had and everybody's world getting upended, and things like resilience are just coming right to the fore. What I'd like to ask you, Janet, is what resilience is. I've heard various definitions of it, but what is it to you?
So I like to think of resilience as a muscle, because when we go to the gym or go walking or whatever activity we do, play tennis, we work our muscles. And, if we work them a lot, we feel okay. But we get to a point sometimes where our body says to us, hey, you know what? I just need to take a break. So I kind of look at resilience like that, as a muscle. The general definition is the ability to bounce back, right? Mm-hmm. But what does that actually even mean? I like to think of it as a muscle. So sometimes we've got to take a rest. So then in the broader context that you mentioned, the pandemic, education, etc., I think we really just have to take a beat and look at things more holistically, because we are human beings, first and foremost.
Okay, yeah, that's that word bouncing back. I mean, it's definitely the word or the phrase I've heard the most frequently in association with resilience. In fact, I think I've heard what I think is an invented word, bounce back ability, used synonymously with resilience, which I quite like. But it's exactly as you say, you get into the deeper idea of, well, what does that actually mean? And there's a worry perhaps of conflating it with concepts that don't sit very easily alongside it, like grit, toughness, because it's not really what it's about, is it? When you talk about that, I mean, what would be the difference? I think people do get that a little mixed up. What would you say the difference is between sort of resilience and that slightly older fashioned, I guess, idea of, stiff upper lip, toughness, grit, determination, stick your jaw out and get through it? What's the difference?
Just do it.
Yeah.
So another analogy might be, if you think of an elastic band, right? You go backwards and forwards with your elastic band, eventually it's going to snap. So just looking at it from the resilience point of view, again, like a muscle, sometimes people need to listen and take a break. Then you talk about grit. So what is grit? So grit is that innate thing. Like some people find it easier to plow through things. I'm really like analogies and pictures. I'm a very visual person.
Brilliant. We love analogies.
So for example, I've always wondered, and resilience has always been an interest of mine. So I've always wondered, how come some people can proverbially stub their toe and they can't get out of bed? Other people have this tsunami come over them and they just get up and go. Why? So, grit, I think we all have grit. I think some people can just access it better than others. If that helps you any.
It does. I mean, it's grit to me, I love your elastic band analogy, because grit to me, it feels like there's a sort of rigidity or a brittleness to that, that, you can be unyielding, but is that necessarily the best thing? Because, we are, as you said at the beginning, we are humans, and it's not, what's behind that? Are we fully connected and engaged in events? Are we fully reflective? The famous line about there's cracks in something, that's how the light gets in. I mean, is there any growth if we don't yield to events and allow things to sort of happen, but then learn from them and come back again? So I wonder, I'm certainly I find the idea of resilience much more human, and much more sustainable, as well than grit.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think especially, if you kind of alluded to it, if when something traumatic happens, whether it's a major life event or, something that some other people might view as minor, but to us, it's not minor. We need to take a beat or take a moment, sorry, my South Africanisms, and just sit with it for a moment. Like, what are we feeling? Why am I feeling this? What am I going to do about it? Because as a society, we just like go, go, go. And that doesn't work when you experience a traumatic event. You need to hang out with it for a bit. Of course, some people just can't get out of it, right? And they need help. So I want to preface this with saying that if you need help, please talk to people. Do not just sit and think, okay, I'm just sitting and reflecting on my traumatic event. So please seek help if you really need it. Anyway, so yeah, I think it's a really important part. And, when we look at this whole context of the pandemic, and all its negative connotations, I think we need to step back and say, okay, we've just been through a massive event. And in my opinion, everybody is resilient. I mean, everybody who's standing, you and I sitting here, the kids going to school, the students, the educators, in my opinion, they are absolutely resilient. They got up, what you said, they use their grit to grind through. Yeah, and here we are now. Now what, right? Like my podcast. I'm sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. Now what? Yeah, and that's a very nice segue into that, actually. And we should say right now that that's something I was really happy to hear, is that you're about to launch your own podcast called Now What, and it's coming out quite soon, isn't it? But I mean, are you going to be talking about along these kinds of themes as well? Are you going to be sticking around the sort of well-being angle, or is it going to be broader?
Well, everything I do is through a well-being lens. However, it is broader. We're going to look at things both from a personal and a work perspective. So on Now What, hosted by JR, I just wanted to give the whole name. We're going to be, talking to a diverse group of people, to see how or what they did when when life happened, because sometimes you're going along and bam, the world turns upside down, right? And then we will also talk to experts in the field to see what guidance they can give us and help. And then through the work lens, we will talk to experts in that field as well, because let's face it, technology is changing at such a rapid pace. You could go into the office and your boss could say to you, you're being replaced by an algorithm, or you need to reskill, upskill. What now?
Well, I think this is quite possibly part of this. I mean, the fact that resilience has become such a familiar word in our lexicon as educators, in particular, it's the word that's very, very present. Part of it is the pandemic, of course. That's a major accelerant of this. It's brought it right to the fore. But also, of course, we've got this huge uncertainty changing around, that's accelerated. It's not, there's always been things going on in the world, in other times in history, but it seems like, particularly with technology, climate change, these are two things that are accelerating towards a very unpredictable end. So we're talking about something that can help us not be unyielding and as you said, like plow our way through things, but adapt to events and, check in with ourselves, reflect and grow and come back and sort of renew and recharge ourselves in some way.
Absolutely.
Sounds great, but then we get into the really tricky area of how on earth do we do that? So thinking about, with sort of young learners up to, university students, obviously, but not just them, but teachers as well. We saw in education, during the pandemic that it was incredibly hard on some teachers, and you could see the way that some made the shift, not easily, but they managed it with little friction, and others it just turned their world upside down. And there's more of that to come. So
absolutely, yeah.
How do we help them? How do we actually, help them develop? Is it something, it's not done in a workshop, it's done over time, I would guess, or I mean, what's the strategy?
So this is just my opinion. I think we need to pause, which we've spoken about already, and then we need to firstly, let's look at the educators. I mean, we know, generally speaking, if the adults are okay, the children will be okay, because behavior is not something you can instruct. Behavior is modeled. We like to say, do as I do, not as I say, but that doesn't actually work. So we need to look at the educators and see, okay, what can we do to help them? If you think of an educator, whether it's in higher education or in the schooling system, they've been thrust into this, as you said, uncertainty, and they are not mental health therapists. Their scope of work is instruction, to instruct the students. And of course, they are there to support the students, but they never went to school to, do psychology and how do I help people build resilience? How do I help people adapt? No, that's not in their scope of work. So I think we need to look at that. I mean, a friend of mine who works at a different company, Wellness Innovate here in Calgary, she says that what we need to do, we need to be reframing things. So we need to, instead of looking at all the limitations of, we're tired, we've had this pandemic, and like you said, historically speaking, there are so many inequities in the education system. That's a whole another topic, right? So she says we need to reframe and look at possibilities. And I completely agree, because I think we need to stop talking about all of the whole conversation. And I'm being very, I'm generalizing here, but we need to reframe and switch around and stop talking in a doom and gloom kind of frame and look at, okay, we know we've got to go forward. We know we need some solutions, because I think by reframing and thinking in a possibility mindset, immediately our brains feel better. Because as you know, neurologically speaking, our brains can't tell whether something is true or whether it's made up. So, I think that saying, fake it till you make it has actually got some bearing here. However, again, I just want to really preface, because mental health illnesses are very serious. So I don't want anybody listening to this to think I can just get out of bed and fake it and, my life's going to be okay. Some people it will, but if you really need help, please get help. Sorry, I just really want to stress that.
Well, it's a very important message, because, people listening to this, we consciously or unconsciously, we're going to compare ourselves to others, and it's sometimes not helped by people's sort of sometimes very subtle sense of judgment as well, so that when we are experiencing something that is important to us, you might get comparisons from others saying, oh, that's nothing, because maybe in their world it's nothing, but it's all relative to our own experience and our own sense of self and all of that kind of stuff. So the comparisons to others definitely don't help, So I think, I'd like to echo what you said as well. People should never be feeling like they should be X or Y, or they should be able to deal with this and that. It's things are a process. I think probably the most empowering thing is to know that even if you can't now, that things can be changed. There is you mentioned neurologically speaking, it's hugely empowering to think of the malleability of our brain. It's hugely empowering to know basic things like the negativity bias and how the doom and gloom stuff stands out to us 4 or 5 times more than the positive, which is how 24-hour news networks make the money. They know this very well. So
we just like saturated with it, right?
Yeah, and that's it. And this is what I'm beginning to think just from listening to you here, that, and I wonder what you think. It's not like we can focus on resilience alone, right? I mean, you can't do like resilience sessions. It comes as part of a package, doesn't it? You've mentioned pausing, you've mentioned checking in with yourself and acknowledging your feelings, and allowing yourself to feel them. What else is in that package? I mean, resilience, I imagine, comes out of a combination of things. So what's in that?
The other important thing is to know and continuously say, whether it's to yourself, to your students, whomever you're speaking to, it's going to be okay. Mm-hmm. Today we may not be okay. Today we are we going to end up going back to online learning, a hybrid situation, or we're going to stay in person, and then a multitude of other factors, but it's going to be okay. So in order to do that, as you said, we pause, reflect, get help if we need it, tell ourselves it's going to be okay. But again, what does that mean, right? So I think, I was thinking a lot about this, since you asked me to come on the podcast. And of course, as you know, I love technology. Like I'm very excited about everything that's coming online. But I think right now, we have so many resources already out there. We have so many great programs already in place. I'm sure, like here, there's been free tutorials set up. There's been mental health programs set up that educators and students can access. If we look out there in the general learning environment, there are excellent programs that can help students catch up. There's just so much available already. I think what we need to think about and communicate is how can we access those resources? How can we give equitable access? That's the other thing we have to remember. Of course, you're fully aware of this. All things are not equal. There are so many students that are coming from really difficult situations. They don't even have an internet connection, so as you mentioned earlier, it's just completely overwhelming. There's so many, all the different factors here. So maybe if we look at it as a wheel with all these different spokes coming into the middle, and you've got, the educators, the students in the middle. Okay, so now how can we go outwards? And maybe the outward rim of the wheel are the resources. How can we go outwards towards the resources and give those educators and students equitable access? And I know that this is a whole nother big topic, so I'm just going to kind of touch on that. But I do think right now, I don't think we have the time to reinvent the wheel. I think we need to look at what do we have right now? What from evidence-based studies do we know works? And then give access to those programs. And of course, as we know, everything boils down to the dollar factor, right? But I mean, they're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on, pouring money into the education system and other systems to help people. How about if we think about it, let's access what's already out there, instead of thinking building a new program. That's just my opinion.
It's also sometimes the the strategy as well. I mean, it seems to be a little scattergun sometimes. I mean, I understand in one sense that the way that you're framing it, if I understand, is that if you're kind of thinking about that, I'm in the world and things are happening around me and to me, so I'm at the center of this, spectrum of things. That's pretty horrible place to be, actually, because you have no agency, no voice, no choice.
Yeah.
And that is scary place to be. So, I think one thing that the education system's kind of getting right is that, we need to talk about resources, techniques, whether it's breathing and self-reflection and affirmations and all these kinds of things. Great, because you're pushing against that and you're saying, no, I'm going to take agency and ownership, and here's things that I can do. And as you say, I might not feel good today, but I can get there. But the thing that I find is that I don't know if you've seen this as well, that last year, I think it was last year, maybe even the year before, time is bending. I was asked to produce a workshop with a series of 4 classes for a high school that in well-being, in flipping negative thought patterns. And I thought that's a really interesting thing. And I did my best to, really scaffold it for any professional that they could use it and get the most out of it, and lots of different resources and cool videos and all this kind of stuff. But then when you've got this feeling when you're passing it over and you're like, well, who's delivering this? How are they?
Exactly.
And that's the thing. It's like you can't just depend on resources alone, surely. We've got to think holistically about the culture behind it. And you said before, if the teachers are okay, the students are okay. So, what's out there for, what needs to happen for teachers as well? There's lots of resources for the learners, but for teachers who might think, I'm an adult, I've got my life together, more or less.
We like to think so.
We like to think so, yeah. But it can be difficult for them to actually say, maybe I need a bit of help too. Maybe I need to learn how to stop and check in with myself. So how do we have those conversations with these institutions and say it's not just about your learners?
Exactly. And that's a really important point. So like you say, you can't, well, not like you say, like whoever they all say, you can't build a house on a shaky foundation because it's going to all fall down, right? So yes, we need our educators to be okay. So what can we do? Well, I think firstly, we need to really take a look at, which I mentioned earlier, their scope of work. What are they actually there to do? And stop, which I know is really difficult because even pre-pandemic, we were really overloading educators. I've got a number of educators in my extended family, and, even pre-pandemic, it was difficult. In the pandemic, it was impossible. So yes, we need to look at what we can do for them. Now, I have one suggestion, which is in Calgary, but you can do it online. Again, at Wellness Innovate, what they do is they do a 2-day Flourishing Life program. And I'll send you the contact information because I think it would be really great for you to have a conversation with Connie. Anyway, so they do a 2-day intensive, either in-person or online program. And then when the educators come out, sorry, I should have prefaced this, they do a lot of work with educators. So this is kind of their wheelhouse. They do evidence-based, and it's an evidence-based program. So when the educator goes back to university, the school on Monday, they actually understand more how, neurologically speaking, the students are thinking. And then they get some practical tools that they can actually go into their lecture classroom on Monday and implement. So this isn't replacing a degree in psychology, but it gives them a practical tool or practical tools to implement right away. So that's just one suggestion. And I'm sure there are other companies out there doing things. So
that's
perhaps
interesting. Yeah. The wellness centered, no, what was the center?
Wellness
Innovate.
Innovate, yeah. Now, and I realize, I apologize if I wasn't supposed to do a plug for them, but they are just doing some amazing work, you know, and their results are speaking for themselves, you know, because they did, sorry, excuse me, the coffee speaking now, they did sessions for the educators here in Calgary and Edmonton during teacher conference. And they asked the teachers, what was the most, what do you need help with? They said overwhelmingly what I mentioned before, we need administrators to recognize that we are not mental health professionals.
Yeah.
You know, overwhelmingly that was top of mind for them. So it kind of reinforced for Connie and her colleagues what they were doing, because, you know, then they had educators come into the program and then got, you know, the feedback from the outcomes. And yeah, it was phenomenal, the results that they got. So maybe, you know, going back to what we talked about at the beginning, you know, there's a lot of technology, and I can go on and on about connecting to all kinds of technology. But again, we need to remember we're human. You know, we need that human connection. So perhaps whether it's online or in person, I'm just going to use again this Flourishing Life program, 2-day program. Perhaps that's what educators need more of. You know, instead of people talking at them, you know, sending them these long emails and, you know, click here and somebody will talk to you, or read this or listen to this on top of everything they have to do. Perhaps we need to think about some kind of human connection, in addition to, of course, because of the sheer numbers of people, you know, that's the other thing. Sorry, I should have mentioned. I realize there are just tens of thousands of people that we have to help. And it's not always feasible to do that, you know, one-on-one or in a group. We need the, you know, the larger connection. So which comes, fortunately, because we have the technical capabilities, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, so sorry, that was a waffling long way of saying. Sorry, you'll have to forgive me. I'm trying really hard not to go down bunny trails, because if anybody knows me, any speeches they've heard me give, I'm always going down the bunny trail. But, you know, the bottom line is, again, there's a lot of resources out there. I think we need to just think, and perhaps we need to actually bring in companies that can do this for the administrators, for the educators, because they have the capacity and they have the knowledge, you know, to bring a fresh perspective. And perhaps, you know, perhaps that would help administrators and people that are trying to figure out how can we help our educators, you know. And the administrators are overloaded too. They're overwhelmed. They've had their personal experiences, you know. So I don't know, I've been trying to really think and backtrack, from a kind of very top level point of view. What can we do now? Because we can run all our studies and that is super helpful and we need that data. But right now people need help today.
Yeah.
You know, and I think another big part of this is communication. I think, and I don't know, I mean, I'm not obviously privy to all these conversations that administrators have with the educators, but I think they need to also be helped to reframe. It's going to be okay. This is what we're doing. This is what we don't know. How we're going to do it. Be honest, be transparent. You know, because people are sitting there thinking, you know, there's going to be some magic bullet coming down the line. It's not going to happen. There is no magic bullet. As you mentioned, it's time. And everybody hates that. The word, just give it time. It's a process. Oh my goodness, you know.
People start looking at their watches. Yeah.
You know, so I think bottom line, you know, time, recognize, as you mentioned before, people are in different situations. Some people have money, you know, some people have many rooms in their house. Some people have access to help. Some people don't. People have internet connections, some people don't, so yeah, there's many factors, but I think if we can just communicate, it's going to be okay. We're thinking about this. We don't have all the answers, but the door's open.
Yeah. And it's hard. I mean, what you're talking about time, it's certainly a factor in all this, because if I think about, I'm zooming out a lot here. A lot of the conversations we have on this podcast are about the systemic approach in general. And if you think about education being the way education currently looks is very much a product of the Industrial Revolution, and this kind of, you're not getting people ready to be self-actualized, happy individuals. You're getting them ready to be productive members of the economy.
And regurgitate what they're told, right?
And regurgitate what they're told. And so, yeah, you've got, I mean, this is what you're talking about right now is fixing the problem right now, which certainly needs to happen. And perhaps, one of the hardest things for people to do is, you mentioned stopping and checking in, which is the essential thing, is not just clicking this button and read this paper and do this course, but actually to learn how to stop and say it's okay to stop, which is one of the healthiest things you can possibly do. And I am speaking from raw experience here, probably the hardest thing I've ever had to do in my life, because I don't know how to stop, and I'm still working it out, and I'm a product of that system, and I'm always on and always going, and it's not good for us. And then, of course,
not sustainable.
As events accelerate, we're in trouble. So probably that's one of the most difficult things in terms of the challenge right now, is to actually make this front and center as a conversation when people are thinking about, we need to do something, and you're in the background saying, no, actually, maybe we just need to stop and connect and share how we're feeling, and trust that in that space, we innately have the tools to connect and feel others around us and say, we're going to find a way forward together.
We have all the
solutions.
We have all the solutions, but if we're not quiet for a moment, we can't hear them. Exactly. Just touching on your previous piece, I mean, we know we have to reimagine education. I mean, that's our big goal, because we need to produce people. Well, sorry, that's a bad word.
That's what we're doing now. Yes, production line.
We're producing now. We don't want to produce. We want to enable. I'm sorry, there was a slip of the tongue. We want to enable people, as you said, to be well. I mean, people are so tired of the treadmill. They're so, they just had enough. You look at the younger generations, they're like, no ways, we ain't doing this. We want value in our lives. We want purpose in our lives, so I think that needs to be there. And the other part of it is, I can find out any information. I can click a button. I've got a computer in my pocket, but I need to go through the schooling process, because our brains haven't developed yet to be able to just magically know, I've got to go and put this question into Google, and then I'll get the answer. So we still haven't evolved as humans to the point where we can just access the information. We have to go through our schooling. However, what skills are we going to need? Obviously critical thinking and all the other soft skills are going to be vital. Sorry, I'm going a little off topic here, but bottom line, we know the big picture. We know what we're doing now, long term, is not sustainable. You mentioned earlier climate change and all the rest of it. I mean, we know all the different pillars of sustainability. But in my opinion, if people are not well, the economy is not going to be well. The climate change is not going to happen, because if people are unable to sustain themselves, let alone what's going on in their environment, it just ain't going to happen.
It's almost like our chickens are coming home to roost in a little bit, because our education system has, and again, I'm absolutely not being hard on, it's not about teachers, it's not about all the amazing, extraordinary effort they put in.
Oh, heroic.
Heroic.
I couldn't be an educator.
No, they are heroes of mine, 100%, and unflinching support for them. It's not about that, but certainly about the way that the big picture, the design of it, especially the kind of assessment driven stuff,
Exactly.
is that we've ended up with people who they're able to fit into a world of sort of reasonable linear certainty that, that we used to have a couple of generations ago, where you got a job in the bank and stayed there for 30 years and house prices rose a little bit, but you kind of knew, it was all,
It
I'm
was
not going to say
okay.
life was easy, but you kind of sort of knew what was around the corner and ish. But now, I mean, it's like, things just change from one second to the next, and our brains can't catch up to it. I mean, even just the impact of social media on teenagers and all this kind of stuff that we're still grappling with, information literacy, and with trying to filter all the incredible amount of stuff around us and people trying to manipulate us with bias and all kinds of stuff. We're just not able to deal with it. And then at the very moment in the world where we need to be able to step back and say, let's take a little bit of ownership here and feel a sense of agency. And I can't solve everything, but I'm going to have a go at this and feel like I can make a difference. And as you say, things are going to be okay. And instead, we've got a lot of people who are just withdrawing, going in.
I heard a really good quote the other day. I was listening to Amber Mack of Amber Media. Sorry, I'm big about giving credit where things come from. For the Strike Up Women's Conference, and she said, we need to be okay with living in predictable unpredictability. Mm-hmm. And if you think about that, that really sums up everything, I think we like to think, the pandemic, hit us sideways. The reality is life changes all the time. That's one of the only certainties in life is change. So, so I think, how do we get to being okay with predictable unpredictability?
Yeah. I mean, change
really
is the only constant, isn't it? It really is. Mm-hmm. And if we can embrace that, we might be able to deal with it better, to roll with it. But if we think about going back to, you said that things have to change in education and you see things through a well-being lens. So if we're to kind of go back at education and say, right, the whole thing rests on well-being, the whole thing rests on people feeling the best versions of themselves, and again, that comes into equity as well. Equity of access to opportunities, of course, is always the undertone to all of this.
Exactly.
But in terms of the education system, how do you, what kind of things would you like to see in there? So if we're taking away this kind of like assessment driven, fitting into Xbox sort of thing, and of course we still need to be numerate and literate and all that other stuff, but what kind of things would you like to see in, say, a primary or secondary course of studies or education? What kind of things would you like to see in there?
I think there should be, more emphasis on, like we mentioned, critical thinking, or, the what now kind of aspect of life, and even financial literacy, all the things that schools do not teach us. They teach us all these, how to do math, biology, whatever. And that's all great, but it's not a life skill per se. So I would say, if I was to use a, kind of a box, I would say more life skills and more soft skills. The other thing I think we need to look at is resistance, because a lot of people, and again, like you said, I'm not saying anything against educated administrators, anybody. They've inherited a system, So, and then we all, as you alluded to earlier, we all programmed, whether we like it or not, we influenced by the things we watch, the people we hang around with, the books we read. We know all of this. However, I think we don't actually really get how much programming goes on, how much we are being changed. So, and then we are children, we go to school, university, whatever. become a plumber, it doesn't matter, whatever it is. We have our set way of thinking. And when the paradigm changes, it's very difficult. So now we're telling people, or the bigger, larger education system, we need people, to be able to function in the 21st century. Wonderful, but some of them are going to resist that. So that's the other piece I think we need to acknowledge, is that how do we help the people who are going to resist change get through it? I just wanted to mention that because we didn't mention it earlier. But yeah, I think it's just, one day at a time. And I know that's easy for me to say sitting here in Calgary and, in my little pond. But of course, when you're looking at the ocean of education, well, the waves are just going to keep coming, right? So,
Absolutely.
And so if I were to say anything, I would just say transparency, support, action. Think about it, design it, and then action it. But maybe you can't action the whole change. Like you said, this is one thing I can do today. Talking about one thing I can do today for the students, like the higher education students. I don't know if you've heard of an app technology, an app called Woebot, WOEBOT.
Nope.
Now, Woebot is great. They've done a lot of studies, so this is evidence-based. And the ad literally says, he has nothing else to do, or she has nothing else to do. They have nothing else to do. So it's an app you can access, and it learns over time. So, at midnight, if Mary Jo or Johnny are feeling like, oh, I've got, 6 assignments, 2 labs, and a big exam coming up, what now, So they found that Woebot helps a lot of people in that age group. And I'm saying people in that age group, adults can use it, but you may not understand the language. They have they have designed it so it speaks to the students, the higher education students. Yeah. And
so
they
with their sort of slang and stuff, or
the lingo of the day, you may not understand,
oh, hey, Janet, I'm super cool. I'll have no problem. Yeah.
Or what's your boo? Like what?
Oh no, yeah. Actually, no.
So that's why I prefaced it with that. But they've done a lot of studies with this, and it's helping a lot of people with anxiety and depression. Again, sorry, I'm really big on this. It doesn't replace a therapist. And if you have serious depression, please get help. But it has really helped because it's based on cognitive behavioral therapy. So it's not just some random program. It's evidence-based, scientifically based. And the program is an AI program with neuro-language processing. So it's actually quite amazing. I actually got a couple of my adult children to start using it just so I could see, they get their feedback. And they say it's pretty good. So there's another easy tool, and you can download the app, and there's a code you can get, so you can use it for free for 3 months.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if you want me to give you the code, or you can Google it.
Yeah, I'll put that. You could send it to me, and I'll put it in the comments below the video. Actually, I'm going to check this out as well, because I like, obviously an app is quite a good thing because it's more accessible than, say, something that you need to go to that somebody else is providing, face to face, or there's some amazing stuff going on in things like virtual reality, but of course not everybody can afford a headset or has access to one. Apps are, a bit more, phones are reasonably
Accessible,
ubiquitous in our parts of the world anyway. So,
right.
so it sounds like, obviously that there are a lot of resources out there. Do you think that, technology, it can help build resilience, in terms of what
Definitely.
you're talking about, certain apps, and obviously it can impact our well-being negatively as well.
Right.
It's quite a double-edged sword. So, I mean, in terms of how it supports our ability to develop resilience, and say there's somebody listening to this and they're like, okay, I want to take things into my own hands a little bit. I recognize in myself that I get a bit overwhelmed by stuff and I disappear into myself for a few days or whatever. And I want to bounce back quicker. I want to return to emotional fitness, to the baseline a little quicker, and just train myself to do it. What kind of things can they do without external stuff going on? If they've just got a phone or a laptop, what kind of stuff can they do?
So you mentioned that there's a lot of apps and technology and virtual reality, that's down the road for from an accessibility point of view. But there are a lot of other apps that are accessible, some of them free, some of them not. But anyways, so I think firstly, one would need to think, so how can I help my brain? Because if I can't help my brain, I'm not going to be able to learn. I'm not going to be able to figure out a schedule to do my work, whatever. So we know that meditation is really helpful. And some people find it easy to meditate and other people not so much. However, there's apps like Calm. You've probably heard of that one. And, I can send you some other information, but there's a variety of different apps that are easily accessible if you have a phone or a laptop and it's with you all the time. And that teaches you over time. You may, when you start using it, you may find it difficult, but over time, for sure, if you sit there for a couple of minutes, close your eyes, even if you don't have a phone with you, if you just sit, close your eyes, put your hand over your heart and breathe slowly in and slowly out. And you do that a few times till your breathing matches the rhythm of your heart. That brings our blood pressure down. That opens our brain because we get more oxygen. So, little things like that. There are some physical tips you can do, and then connecting to apps. There's some fabulous apps out there, and a lot of them, some of them are gimmicky, but a lot of them are very well researched and evidence-based. So they do actually help. And
it's tremendously helpful stuff that's out
absolutely.
there, isn't it? Yeah. And even the breathing thing, it's funny because people might think it's, we mentioned something about, okay, I think from an educator's perspective, I think educators have to or should be getting a bit of a grounding in neuroscience because, obviously not becoming neuroscientists, but just learning basic stuff about the brain, because it really, really helps us demystify things like resilience and well-being. In some ways, there are still a lot of unknowns, but we're at a point where we do know quite a lot from neuroscience.
Absolutely.
It's getting pretty credible.
Sorry to interrupt. They can show on an MRI the effects of positive thinking. Now, I'm not talking about Pollyanna positive thinking. I'm talking about a future-focused attitude. We know absolutely 100% that changes. It physically changes your brain. So this is another little technique people can use, that doesn't require any kind of technology. You can decide that on one thing I'm going to be more positive about. So, for example, I don't know, I haven't been at university for many years, but I've got a lab I've got to prepare for. And every time I go in that lab, I break something, I drop something. So I've got all this anxiety around being in a laboratory, for example. I'm just picking that out of the air. So then instead of talking to myself and saying to myself, I'm so clumsy, I'm always dropping things, I can say to myself, I have this. I can go in that laboratory, I can sit down, you can break it down in your head, whatever your language is. And of course, I realize my way of speaking is not the same way of speaking of other people, but you get the point. You break it down, and then you can put an elastic band around your wrist. This is just very low tech. Put an elastic band around your neck, not your neck, please, around your wrist. Every time you catch yourself going, I'm so clumsy, ding, you ding yourself.
Yeah.
And it's pretty amazing. You can use that technique with pretty much anything to change your brain, because we don't like pain. So every time we say a negative thing, whatever it is, our brain's going to get a shot of pain. To be simplistic, I'm being obviously really simplistic here. And as you alluded, neuroscience are the way our brains work. But yeah, there's a number of just basic techniques people can use to change the way they think.
And this is empowering. And it's like you say the word neuroscience and people, oh my goodness. But it can just be things like that. I mean, understanding the negativity bias, understanding, the way that memories are formed, our association with pleasure and pain, and the different ways that we recall them, all that kind of stuff. Basic chemical things, cortisol and its effects, and, dopamine and of course, social media and the effects of excessive scrolling on our dopamine replenishment, all that kind of stuff is, I think, vital information, because it's not to make everybody suddenly neuroscientists, but it's like suddenly it opens up the box and you're like, okay, there's nothing wrong with me. There are just these processes happening. And if I understand these processes, I can actually do something different, introduce a different action to get a different reaction. And when that starts to change, everything starts to change.
Absolutely.
But it's still a bit mysterious, isn't it? We still talk about it as if it's...
And I think that's the other thing, demystifying how our brains work. I mean, I'm not a neuroscientist by any stretch of the imagination. It's just over the course of my lifetime, a few years, I've learned these things. And when I practice what I preach, great. But like you said earlier, it's easy to preach and not necessarily practice. I shouldn't use the word preach, because again, there's biases in that, but it's easy to talk about. Not always easy to implement. So that's the other thing is, and just calm down. We can't do anything. You mentioned dopamine and that, and if we live in a constant fight or flight state, so that cortisol is running through our bodies all the time, we know that affects our health. There's just so many little things that people perhaps are not aware of, or if they are, they don't kind of put together the impact on their brains or on their bodies. Yeah.
And it is a kind of, it is sort of the next step, isn't it? I mean, when you talk about schooling, and just to kind of round this back to education a bit, but it's like, you mentioned having things like life skills in there. Now, I think that's something I was expecting you to say, nature-based learning and self-reflection and, meditative practice or something like that, or, journaling. But you're absolutely right. I mean, that life skills, these things that help reduce anxiety in our lives, and finance is a major source of anxiety of people that don't know how to control their own finances and balance their books and make things work for them and not be taken advantage of as well.
Exactly.
Those things would change everything. And as you say, we don't have to fill every hour of every day with the acquisition of knowledge, because we have technology and we can find that. We need to know how to filter knowledge and how to construct it and how to apply it to different things. But we don't need to memorize it anymore. It's pointless.
And what question to ask? Like, it's amazing how many people don't know how to ask Google the question so they get the answer they need or want. It's not anything on the person. It's just we simply have not been taught that. And I really feel for educators. Like I say, I've got a number of educators in my extended family, and it's been heartbreaking watching them, because they are so much for their students. How can I help my students? What can I do today to make things better? Okay, I'm online. Now I'm in person. Now I'm in a hybrid situation. I can't even begin to imagine how they dealt with all of that. So, it's, just really don't want to suggest that we need to add one more thing to their pile. I think more what I'm saying is that it's in the reimagining education part of what we need to perhaps add and think about. And of course, what you mentioned, journaling, meditation, all of those tools are really helpful.
Yeah. Especially now that the science behind them is coming
clear.
it's clear. Because it used to be, you talked about this stuff and people would be like, oh, you're a hippie. It's like, well, no, not really,
It was like, woo, woo.
You couldn't talk about meditation, you might as well have been selling incense or, but now the science is clear and it's a very interesting time, but it's just like, it's just not quite pervasive yet in education system, so it seems to me when you look at people that it's almost the next stage in our evolution as a species, as you see the way that people are starting to really fine tune themselves. You get these people that are talking about flow states of concentration, for example. You've got people like the neuroscientist Andrew Huberman, who's talking about, certain, very specific protocols. You're basically mastering and maximizing the impact of what you can do with your body and mind.
Exactly.
Which is incredibly exciting. These people are doing amazing things through, everything from, immersion in cold water to breathing techniques to reflection to constructing very specific regimen of the way they eat and when they get up and when they see sunlight, where the light is in the room, what they're reading and when, and what they give attention to, when they put the creative tasks, when they put the low cognitive load tasks in the day. It's quite amazing. And I feel like, if we were able to start having those conversations, at school and looking at the evidence below it and saying like, let's bring these are life skills, they're human skills into education, we might have a situation where we wouldn't feel so helpless. I don't know, is that idealistic?
No, it's right in my wheelhouse. So I'm trying really hard. I'm actually sitting on my hands so I don't go down a huge bunny trail because I'm guessing we don't have a lot of time left here. We can have a conversation about that another day, but absolutely.
So you're modeling self-regulation then.
Yeah. So for anybody out there, sit on your hands because it's really difficult to get carried away when you're sitting on your hands. So it's extremely exciting, and I wish that, well, not wish, it's on my wish list that these people that are doing this amazing stuff, these super smart people finding out all this stuff that can really help us be well. On my wish list is that either they or somebody who's can communicate that to the layperson, and by layperson I'm being very generic. I'm not, it's just, what does that mean for me? Like, I am running from 5 o'clock in the morning till I collapse in bed at 11 o'clock at night. I realize I could optimize my my well-being. I realize I could get in the flow, but how? So I think it's that translation of the knowledge, which we always go back to. You have a research study, translation of the knowledge, implementation. I think, and I don't know, there's people way smarter than me out there. If somebody could think about that, and make
popularize
it simple
and
easily to implement. I'm really conscious of the fact that we simply right now cannot add another thing to an educator's plate. We simply right now cannot add another thing to a student's plate. I think anything we do has to be beneficial and add to their well-being, because everything else is going to be sorted out. We are going to reimagine education. We are going to figure out how to catch up, the math and the reading and whatever else students have missed. But I don't know, I just feel really strongly right now that stuff is all doable. It's more about the person right now.
Yeah. So the message in the end, if I understand you, is it's going to be all right. We're going to get there.
Absolutely. It's going to be
Yeah.
A-okay.
Well, Janet, thank you for taking the time to be with us today. It's been hugely entertaining just going through this. I know that it's it's a woolly topic. It can be anyway. We're talking about concepts that are sometimes difficult to nail down when you talk about things like resilience. I think we've come to a pretty good definition of it. But in terms of the resources and things like that, it would be really great if you're able to. You mentioned some of the apps and things. I've got Wobot and Cam written down. If there are things out there for learners or for educators as well, if there's anything you can think of, and I think we'll maybe put a wee list on the page, and I'll have a look into the things as well, because people are looking for this kind of stuff.
They are. People are really trying to figure it out, right?
Yeah. Okay, so we'll do that. Well, thank you so much for being with us today. Really appreciate your insights.
Thank you for having me. It was lovely to chat with you.
Likewise. And when is the podcast coming out? So the podcast is Now What?
Hosted by JR. And I have a 3-minute intro up right now. And then starting next week, I'll do weekly uploads and chat about what to do when life happens. Right.
Okay. Which is definitely what we need to hear. And where can we see it? Is it on your LinkedIn page? Is it live
It's on Apple, on Spotify. I am going to upload onto my LinkedIn page. I haven't been brave enough yet, but I'm going to now.
Good.
So Good. Yeah, it's going live, no matter what.
Well, you've got information and insight that people would benefit from having access to. So I hope you do. Yeah.
Thanks so much. Have a great day.
We all need it. You too. Bye. Take care, Janet.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.